If you have been playing Counter-Strike for a long time, you have probably had this thought at least once. How can a picture on a gun be worth more than $1,000? And this is not some random myth from an old forum thread. Skins like that have been sitting on the Steam market for years at seriously high prices. In percentage terms, the growth is insane. What started as cheap cosmetic items turned into a market where some people could have made a fortune off tiny early purchases. But that leads to the real question. How does that even happen? Why do CS skins rise that hard in price? Why do some finishes stay relatively affordable, while others climb into a completely different price bracket over time? I'm Dale, and in this video, we're breaking down why Counter-Strike skins keep getting more expensive, what actually pushes those prices up, and how in-game cosmetics turned into a market with its own logic. The skin economy in Counter-Strike did not appear out of nowhere, like Valve just woke up one day and decided to throw cosmetics into the game for easy money. It was more deliberate than that. Skins arrived in CS in 2013 with the Arms Deal update, and this was not some random experiment. By that point, Valve had already tested the microtransaction model in Team Fortress and knew that players responded really well to customization. And that part matters. Back then, these systems were introduced with a lot more care. It did not feel like a lazy cash grab. It felt like Valve were trying to expand the game in a smart way. That is why skins were not presented as just colorful gun finishes. They were introduced as part of something bigger. On GGDROP, promo code KKVAN gives you an extra 11% on your balance top-up plus an additional bonus wheel spin. So while the skin market in CS runs on scarcity, hype, and price jumps, this is one of those cases where you just get extra on top from the start. Even well-known players were involved in the rollout. Freiberg from NIP was given the honor of personally pushing the update branch, and that is a telling detail, because it shows that skins were already being treated as more than decoration. They were becoming part of Counter-Strike's ecosystem. Part of the revenue from key sales went into tournament prize pools. Players got a new layer of personalization, and the game itself absorbed a major wave of attention and money. So skins did not just appear. In a lot of ways, they marked the beginning of a new era for CS. And once the game had items that people wanted not only to use, but also to collect, the market started playing by very different rules. The more popular the game becomes, the more people want the rare items. That sounds almost too simple, but that is exactly the point. Because the player base grows much faster than the supply of a specific skin. And once that gap starts widening, scarcity takes over. More people want the item, but the number of available skins does not increase at the same pace. And that is where prices begin to move very differently. You can see this most clearly on ultra-rare skins. Their markets are small, supply is thin, and even a moderate jump in player interest can hit the price hard. The clearest example here is the AWP Dragon Lore. It came out in August 2014. In the summer of 2018, it was priced around $1,900. By the winter of 2020, it was already around $4,600. Now look at the player numbers. In the summer of 2018, there were about 11 million active users. By the winter of 2020, that number had climbed to 24 million. So the player base grew by roughly 2.2 times, and the skin price grew by roughly 2.4 times. That is what makes the relationship so easy to understand. When the game keeps growing, a rare skin stops being just a cosmetic item. It becomes something more and more people are competing to own. And the tighter the supply is, the harder the market reacts when demand goes up. That is why the rarest skins are usually the first ones to explode in price. But scarcity alone is not enough to explain skin prices. Because inside the skin market itself, there are other factors that push value up very directly. First, the older a skin is, the higher the chance that new supply is barely entering the market anymore, especially when the case or collection stops circulating the way it once did. So the item gets older, supply gets tighter, and interest does not disappear. Second, rarity. And this one is as straightforward as it gets. The rarer and more visually desirable a skin is, the more expensive it usually becomes. Counter-Strike has hundreds of skins and dozens of collections released in waves. And once some of them stop dropping normally after matches, the market shifts into a new mode. Almost no fresh supply, but demand is still there. Then you have condition, and this is one of the most underrated factors for newer players. The exact same skin can have a massive price gap depending on where. A very clear example is the AK-47 Asimov. The battle-scarred version starts at roughly $24. Factory new sits around $260. So yes, it is the same skin by name, but on the market it almost behaves like two completely different items. And then there is pattern. This is basically the finish seed on the weapon. It decides how the design is distributed, where the desirable color zones appear, and how good that specific copy looks. That is why some versions of the same skin become much more valuable than others. A good example is the Bowie knife in Case Hardened. If the blade rolls an extremely rare blue finish, that pattern is known as a gem. And at that point, the price is no longer based only on the skin name. It is based on the exact individual item. So the CS market does not just ask what skin this is. It also asks how old it is, how rare it is, what condition it is in, and how well the pattern rolled on that specific copy. But the market does not stop there, because some skins gain extra value from features layered on top of the finish itself. The first big one is StatTrak. It is the system that tracks kills and displays them directly on the weapon. On regular guns, that alone makes the item more appealing for a lot of players. On knives, the kill count is engraved on the handle or the blade, which gives it an extra level of appeal for collectors and flex buyers. And the market logic here is pretty simple. If a skin has a StatTrak version, that version can be noticeably more expensive than the standard one. The source text uses the AK-47 Asimov in battle-scarred condition as an example, and states that the StatTrak version can cost twice as much as the non-StatTrak version. So in some cases, one added feature already changes the price in a serious way. But there is another factor that can move skin prices very hard in either direction, and that factor is the meta. Because the more often a weapon gets used, the more demand its skins tend to attract. The logic is simple. If a gun is constantly in the hands of pro players, streamers, and regular players, more people start wanting cosmetics for that weapon too. The clearest example is the long-running story of the M4A1-S versus the M4A4. When the CT rifle meta shifted in 2015, the skin market reacted as well. According to the source text, as of July 2020, only 5.71% of pro players were using the silenced M4. The reason given is a heavy nerf to the M4A1-S and its low popularity compared with the M4A4. That kind of swing almost never happened with the AK or the AWP. Those guns stayed relevant the whole time. But on less stable weapons, the effect of the meta becomes much easier to see. But the skin market did not grow only because players like cool finishes, rarity, and expensive patterns. Valve themselves played a huge role in shaping what this market became. Because formally, the system looked fairly contained. Money earned from selling items on the Steam market could not simply be withdrawn to a bank card. It stayed inside the platform, and you could only spend it there. But in practice, that never stopped the market. Very quickly, players found workarounds that allowed virtual balances to be converted into real money. Yes, that went against the Steam user agreement, but the volume became so large that Valve could never realistically shut down every route. And that is the point where the skin economy stopped being just an in-game feature. It became a semi-shadow cash ecosystem where collectors, traders, gambling sites, and gray market services all started overlapping. And from there, the story went much further. Websites began appearing where CS items were effectively used like currency. Players spun virtual slot machines, bet skins on professional matches, lost expensive inventories, and in some cases, slid into serious gambling problems. And one of the ugliest parts of that whole ecosystem was the lack of real regulation. And wherever that much money moves, scammers show up too. Accounts were stolen, inventories were drained, and items were resold through fraudulent schemes. And this did not hit only random players. Even streamers and pro players got caught in it. Eventually, Valve had to respond. That is when the 7-day trade hold was introduced, blocking the immediate transfer of skins after a trade. As an anti-scam measure, it worked. But at the same time, it hit trading platforms, exchange sites, and fast resellers very hard. Because once every transfer takes a full week, the market loses speed, volume drops, quick flips become harder, and the whole ecosystem stops behaving the way it used to. And then another effect showed up. According to the source text, after that system began operating, skins and cases increased in price by an average of about 30%. So Valve may have been targeting scammers and gray market abuse, but the side effect was that item prices became even more distorted. And that is a great example of how the CS skin market depends not only on players, but also on platform-level decisions. Price appears when several forces line up at the same time. Sometimes it is scarcity, sometimes it is the meta, sometimes it is the rarity of a very specific version, and sometimes one Valve update or one market restriction changes the behavior of the entire ecosystem. Skins were added to make Counter-Strike more enjoyable. Instead, they grew into an economy where a cosmetic finish can end up being worth a serious amount of real money. I'm Dale, and if after this video you look at an expensive skin and see demand, scarcity, and market pressure instead of just a flashy design, then we did our job right. That's it for today. Wishing you nothing but absolute banger games.